Hello and welcome. You're viewing the Citizens Journalist podcast, Mesa County Compass, that brings you the news that you can use from a different point of view. I'm Ruth.
I'm Lisa.
And together we are Mesa County Compass. Our goal is to create an informed, current, active citizenry armed with the facts. We will be covering what's new to you, what it means to you, what you can do about it, and provide you access to the decision makers when we can. Good afternoon. We're here this afternoon with Mesa County Compass and Hogan Peterson as a return performance for what he was with before. He has some answers to some questions that we have. And welcome, Hogan, and kind of give us a brief outline of what you're doing and where you're going, okay?
Absolutely.
And who he is, because you forgot to tell his title again.
Well,
I did.
That's all right. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm Hogan Peterson. I'm the Government Affairs Director for the Grand Junction Area Realtors Association, jointly with the Housing and Building Association of Western Colorado. My job is to advocate for housing policy on behalf of those organizations across the Western Slope, in particular at the local level and a little bit at the state level. It's no secret right now we're at a time in our community and in our state where housing has become extraordinarily expensive, historically, even compared to other areas at different points in time. What people often don't realize is that a big chunk of that comes to the fact that housing is one of the most regulated industries there is. We're regulated at the local level, the county level, the state level, and so on up. So it's this really complicated patchwork of regulations, and I'm glad we're not in healthcare because they're the only ones that are a little bit worse. But it's a double-edged sword when it comes to housing costs and the ways that policies impact our community. It's not like other areas where what Congress and the president are doing are driving a lot of the activity. Most of the time it's things that city council does or the county commission or a planning department or what have you. And I say it's a double-edged sword because these are people that you can see at the grocery store, you can text them and they'll probably text you back. You really have a chance to advocate for policies that are good for our community. But on the other hand, they're capable of doing a lot of bad policy very quickly and having it really impact people's lives. So my job in a nutshell is to navigate that policy world on behalf of organizations who do pretty complicated work and try to bridge the gap on policy to make our community more affordable rather than less so.
And you said that 30% of the cost of a new house is regulations.
That's a big chunk of it. If you want to look at what's, say, a $400,000 house in Mesa County right now, and God forbid you're a young person or a first-time home buyer, that's already a pretty high hurdle to clear. A big chunk of that, 25, 30, 35%, can be attributable to regulation. Wow. Some of that might be supply chain issues, making materials more expensive. Some of that might be a city government mandating that the sidewalks be a certain width and preventing more houses from being built.
And can those codes change?
A great
very
deal.
Easily?
Yeah, a great deal of what's influencing the cost of regulation in local housing is policy set at the local level by city council and city staff. They can make stuff more expensive pretty quickly. Those policies can be removed pretty quickly.
Well, that's good. And we have a big plan that is set to roll out here in just a short period of time that you talked a little bit about last time you were here. Well, actually a lot. But you were on the committee that was working on this plan. So give us an update. Where are we and what can we do? What's good? What's bad?
Yeah, a little background for you. So the plan in question is called the Sustainability and Adaptability Plan. This is a plan by the city of Grand Junction that will be worked on and approved eventually by our city council. And it's a planning document, which means that it's used to make and inform decisions about future development or infill development within our community moving forward. Where it gets interesting is this is more of what you would call a visionary plan. So it's not unlike a community master plan or comprehensive plan. It's very high level. It's more about, hey, this is the intent of our community. This is the direction we want to go. It prescribes very little actual rules. It's not, hey, every house built has to be between this many square feet and that many square feet. It's, hey, our community is trying to achieve X, Y, and Z. What people need to know is that we're governed by 3 or 4 such visionary documents right now, and they have a tremendous amount of influence downstream on what other legislation actually passes.
Okay.
They're usually used to inform, justify, prohibit, whatever, future decisions that really do have a more immediate impact. Where it gets real tricky and where you got to be careful is a plan can look really benign at the time it's passed and be used to justify really impactful stuff years down the road. So you have to have an eye to that. But this plan in a nutshell governs our community's resource uses, especially with an eye to how and where and why we develop stuff in the future. That could be stuff as simple as water conservation. It could be as complicated as our transportation network. But in general, it's something that's going to last probably a very long time, and it's going to influence a lot of other policies. So we need to know how it might impact us and what people can do if they don't like it or if they do like it or whatever.
Right. So how long does this plan take to actually go into effect? Once the city council says we're going to do this, how long does it take to where you start seeing progression in that direction?
Yes, a quick update on where it is. Work on this started just under a year ago with a series of kind of goals. Then we worked through some different drafts and debated provisions and whatever, and kind of got to the point we're at now. Right now we're at the stage where a draft that's about 95% done has been released for public comment. Public comment is open, I believe, till May 25th, so we have a little bit longer to submit comments, and I would encourage people to. You know what? I think I got that just slightly wrong.
May 17th.
It is,
17th. Yeah, that's Friday.
So
Yeah.
public
Next
comment is
Friday.
May
A week from
17th,
today.
so we've got a week. That plan is available on the Engage GJ website. There's a summary and a long version. Read as much as you have time for and at least get the gist of it. You can submit comments online or you can email City Council, and you should do both. The next steps on this after comment ends, it will have already gone briefly to City Council's workshop, so there won't be any votes held. They're going to discuss it and give staff directions on how to tweak it or whatever. At that point in the early summer, a date hasn't been specified yet, it's going to go through the City Council approval process. So meeting 1, it's going to go to them for open discussion. That'll be its first reading or first hearing. There'll be public comment opportunities there. That's really where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. The cake's not done being baked at that point, and they can make changes based on public feedback. After that, it's going to come back and either be up for a little more discussion or for a final vote. My guess, Ruth, to answer your question, is sometime probably in mid-June and maybe just a hair later. It'll go up for a final approval vote. Once it's approved, it will take effect immediately, and any future plans or decisions they make are going to be subject to its provisions. It doesn't really prescribe, like, you have to do this or that. It's more, hey, we have to talk about how this fits into that plan when we make other decisions. But that matters a lot.
It does.
So, will the city council actually look at any emails or anything that we send in on this plan now? Will they really look at that?
Absolutely, yeah, they will. This is a big part of what's fun about doing advocacy work at the local level. They do read all of those. People's lives are busy, so if a city councilman gets 10 emails about a given topic, that's actually kind of a big deal, and they probably will read all of those. But the other cool thing, whether it's a comment that you submit online or email to a counselor or whatever, that's all actually part of the public record. It goes into the packet that city council members get before they discuss this stuff. And if the city were to move forward with this plan and we or your listeners do not like a lot of it, the cool thing is if you submit all those comments and this plan passes and they're making some decision 2 years from now that's really, really controversial and they're citing this plan as justification or opposition for it, well, those comments are still public record. You can go back and say, hey, during the comment period, 50 comments were submitted on this plan. 45 of them said that we want the plan to do this and not that. So if you're claiming something contrary to the will of the community, that evidence will be in the record.
Okay, very good.
And I know that some of the people that have commented on the plan, they ask questions, and the director of the coordinator of the sustainability and adaption, Jennifer, has said, well, be specific on what page is this that you're referencing. Does it matter if you reference a specific page if you're saying, no, I just don't even think you should have any direction over this area at all.
So in the legal sense, no, you don't actually have to reference a specific provision or page. You can just say up front, hey, my comment refers to the entire plan or the gist of it in whole. If you want to use a specific page for specific pieces of it, honestly, that's probably helpful. But no, you don't have to do that, and don't feel constrained to do so.
Because I think sometimes people just have a general feeling that... And you said that this plan is mandated by the state, but as Ruth pointed out, it's not mandated to have to happen right now.
It's not, no. So this is where it gets a little bit subjective. The state legislature, in their infinite wisdom, is constantly passing laws that mandate municipal governments do certain things. Right. That might be do this or else. It might be, hey, if you want to be eligible for state funding, do this or whatever. It's carrots and sticks. There's a number of things the state legislature's done over the last few sessions that mandate local governments do things in the environmental and housing space. That might be that, hey, you need to increase the proximity of new development to transit, or that your buildings need to be such and such level of efficient. This plan would, I think, in theory, address a bunch of the disparate elements of things the state legislature has mandated cities do. It's kind of a package of steps related to all that. But no, there's not like a ticking clock on this. You know, some of the underlying legislation has certain compliance dates or whatever. But to Ruth's point, if this gets a ton of negative feedback, or if council feels like it needs more work, no, there's nothing to stop them from taking or setting the pause button for a little bit and making sure they get it right.
Yeah, that does tend to worry me, because we do have city council members that are coming up for re-election, and they would like to have this on their resume, if you will. This looks good. You know, I did this, I did this, I did this. So it worries me that we're rushing through something that should be a little bit more thought out, a little bit more in depth.
Especially given the city and the outlying area. We are more rural than Denver. It's more compact. The ideas that they have that are kind of Denver based work in Denver because of the way they're set up. But in Grand Junction, you know, one of the ideas, you know, to make bicycle lane, make bigger lanes and stuff. Well, that's all well and good, but cost wise and your community, because if you're out here on the Redlands and we're in the city, but biking downtown, it's not going to be something that I'm going to do because of my age. I mean, it's and time, and you're not going to take your kids to soccer practice and say, okay, everybody get in a line, let's go. You know, it's the timing thing too. So some of the stuff I think is just not very well thought out. It sounds good in theory. I mean, it's lovely to have all these spaces and have everybody look like this, but for the community, what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. And I think you pointed that out with some of the other members of the committee.
I'll go off on a little bit of a tangent here, actually, and then kind of come back around to the point I want to make, because I think it's worth mentioning. You had said, you know, ideas that maybe make sense on the Front Range or whatever. Isn't that a tale as old as time for Colorado? But if you want to look at some of the work the state legislature has done this session, there's a couple good examples that maybe are informative here. I would look at House Bill 1313 that just passed, Housing in Transit-Oriented Communities. It was amended down, I know, before it passed, and I may not be up to speed on the exact provisions that got it across the finish line. But the general idea, and this was sponsored by a number of I-25 corridor legislators, it was one of the governor's top priorities, is that when our municipalities are making zoning and development decisions, the state would like to incentivize them to build more housing, first thing, which that's great. I'm all about that. We have a huge inventory shortage. And to do that in a very dense way, and where possible, they should be encouraged to do that near transit. I'll table the discussion of whether or not that's a good bill or a bad bill for Denver. It might well be a great bill for Denver. I don't really know, and it's not really relevant. What's frustrating is the state legislature's jurisdiction applies to everybody. A bill that was obviously written and intended for the Front Range, well, it applies to us too. A lot of those legislators just aren't familiar with our issues or the ways that we're different or whatever.
Because Mecca's over in Denver.
Well,
everybody knows that.
You know, the old saying is the drive from Junction to Denver is a lot shorter than the drive the other way around.
It is. Everybody knows that.
I mentioned that bill because that dynamic, I think, could be very much at play in an environmental decision the city might make. There's issues that are what we might think of more as a national issue or even a global issue, and there's political trends. Hey, we're really concerned about X. Hey, the world should really start to worry about Y. Where on a big scale, it might well be a legitimate problem or a good idea or whatever. But if we're making decisions for symbolic benefit here at the local level that have real tangible consequences for our citizens but maybe don't move the needle very far in the grand scheme of things, we're making a trade-off that I think is probably not a great idea. What I'll say in defense of a lot of the elements of this plan, because they contain subject matter that really could be a case of, hey, we're gonna really hamstring ourselves for the symbolic benefit of some global issue. There's a lot of places in this where that could have happened, and where certain members of the committee who are maybe not near as conservative as myself still had the fortitude to say, you know, hey, if we did absolutely everything we could to cut our carbon emissions here in Grand Junction, that would greatly increase the cost of living and decrease our quality of life. And it's not actually going to make a difference in terms of carbon emissions, so we need to be careful to do what makes sense on those issues for us, but without going so overboard that we're making bad deals. You know, I think a lot of the plan is maybe a little more philosophically the other direction than I would prefer. But what I did see was a lot of good faith work from folks on this committee not to do these radical symbolic policies. Yeah.
Which could have been very easily implemented.
Oh, very much so, yeah.
And just the entire plan is a little bit symbolic and radical, just in, you know, like Abe Herman has put us in ICLEI, which is global, and it's not necessarily what benefits or what is important to Grand Junction. It's what's important to the world when the world needs to do some of the things themselves. And like you said, it doesn't move the needle that far, but it puts a lot of restrictions on us and also the lead group that they reference in the plan. And I think the decision should be what makes sense here
Absolutely.
And now. And it's not that we want to trash the environment, but what makes sense and what makes it affordable and what makes it a place that people want to live and can afford to live.
We want to keep our lifestyle. We do want to keep our lifestyle. That's why we're here. That's why people like us, is because we are the way we are. We are rural Colorado, and we don't want to be big city, so to speak.
I'll give one example from this plan of a place where I think, I don't know if we got it exactly right, but I think we went the right direction on it. There's a provision concerning air quality standards. And again, this is a symbolic or visionary plan, so it's not, hey, we're going to hit exactly this number. It's, hey, our intent is to have our air quality be X, Y, and Z. The provision of the plan concerning air quality says that the goal for the future is to maintain our existing air quality standards. That's not what it originally specified. Originally, it wanted to prescribe either an explicit standard or to have higher air quality standards or whatever. There was some pretty good recognition, I think, amongst the group. One, that our air quality is very good. Two, that our air quality standards right now are defined actually in a pretty healthy way. The Front Range is constantly setting or being subject to standards that's triggering EPA compliance. What we could have done was set a way higher target for that, but what the community recognized is that when our air quality is questionable,
it's because of an inversion.
it's one of a few things, none of which are influenced by actual stuff people do. There's a wildfire going on.
Right.
It's, hey, there's a windstorm, there's an inversion. If
the Utah dust coming in.
Yep. You know, the original plan included discussion of vehicle emissions inspections like Denver has. That ultimately is not going to move forward. If we had done that, and if we actually made everyone check their car and have really good emissions equipment, Not that you shouldn't have your emissions under control,
Right.
but that would impose a real cost on people that we don't currently pay.
Mm-hmm.
And it wouldn't have helped our air quality any.
Mm-hmm.
Further, when our air quality does dip below the current standard, which it does a few times
Yeah.
a year,
Mm-hmm.
Right.
this plan was discussed in such a way that that's not going to trigger a bunch of rules that we all have to, oh shoot, there's a wildfire. That means we can't drive anymore until the air cleans up.
Right.
Right.
That was pretty wise, and actually
Mm-hmm.
it helps us prepare should we be challenged by the state or the federal government on our air quality.
Mm-hmm.
What you're basically saying
Uh-huh.
is what we have got is pretty doggone good. It could be a whole lot worse.
Yeah, that is what I'm saying. We do have it good. If people want to talk through big national issues and then make us subject to them, they could inadvertently make our lives really hard for no reason, and we didn't do that.
Mm-hmm. So I know you want to continue on with the plan, but one of the big questions was, how did they, when City Council decided to make this, it wasn't really well known. I mean, we didn't know about it until we were informed a couple of weeks before.
Sure.
Before you
When
came
we-
on the first
yeah.
time. Right.
Yeah.
And selecting the committee that was going to give them influence, they didn't tell people, as a whole, submit an application. We're doing this, and I also think if they did it just through the Sentinel, I don't know how they recruited members. I think that it should have been more a whole community focus for anybody that was interested, because I think if
We're
people
not
don't
that
know there's an
large. We could.
opportunity.
Yeah.
Be included.
Yeah, actually, that gives me a thought. Typically, when a working committee is going to be convened or they're updating a planning document, the terms of how often that has to be updated or the fact that it's happening, that's all public record.
Right, but how does the public know?
That's the
Let's
question,
go,
isn't it?
Let's go
It is.
look and say, well, is it time for the
Yeah.
public? Is it time for the plan to be updated? Well, I better be checking every day
Yeah.
because I don't have anything else to do.
So here's my takeaway. If I'm
Yeah.
hypothetically on council and I really want people on a committee that agree with me, it'd be really easy to cherry pick, and sometimes I think they probably do that. My direction to you guys, to your listeners, would be encourage your city council members now and then, regularly. Hey, are there any working groups coming up? Are there any plans? Encourage them to share, hey, you need to be putting out a call to the community for people to sit on these committees. Ultimately, they're just advisory committees, right? I'm providing opinions. Council can take it or leave it.
And that's fine.
That's all good and well, but it does end up having quite a bit of influence for better or worse.
Right.
Right.
I'll give credit to our current city council, who philosophically do not agree with me most of the time. There was some discussion of myself and a couple others on this plan being on that committee or not during they had a confirmation vote. Ultimately, they said we're a little uncomfortable with some of the perspectives represented, but it is still important that that voice be allowed to participate, and they supported me and the others. I'll give them kudos for that. They don't have to include anybody, and they're willing to entertain that. So,
Well, and they should, or people that are disenfranchised from that should say, make it known. We were not included. Our voice is not included in a plan that affects every single person in the city and beyond.
And beyond, yes.
Because
of the people doing business in the city who
Right.
live outside
Sure.
of the city. And
Right.
the whole valley is so interconnected that Grand Junction is the hub for everybody, and whatever's done here,
everywhere else.
everywhere else.
Well, and because the way the city has enclaved, like our subdivision is enclaved, but right across the street is county. And so the people in the county are still impacted by what's going on in the city.
But not necessarily able to participate in that same way.
Exactly.
Right.
Here's one as you and your listeners are asking city council for representation in these processes, whether it's this one or anyone in the future, it won't hurt to remind them, look, you should appoint people who are maybe disagree with you as much as possible as dissenting voices, even if maybe we're a little bit surly. That helps them too.
I can't imagine you being surly. Ever.
But look, if you're a counselor and you've appointed your own opponents to an advisory committee and you're taking some flack when that plan goes to pass, shoot, that gives you ammo too. You can say, no, dissenting voices were included. We did our diligence. Here's what they said. Ultimately, I'm deciding to go this direction, and that's their prerogative. The policy where everyone's at least allowed to voice an opinion is still better policy.
Right.
It certainly is. And then if we don't like what is being done, make the changes in the council themselves.
Well, absolutely, yeah. Yep.
So, if you don't mind, go through, you said there's a synopsis of the plan.
There is.
And give us maybe a synopsis, but then the parts that you feel are good and the parts that you think, I question this, whether
Sure.
we need this
And
or
we'll
not.
sit back and let you have it.
Okay, yeah. I've got my computer here in front of me, so I'll just do a quick rundown of it. I'll say every element of this, because there's a short list of major ones. It's a little bit nuanced. There's places where I think it's outright a good idea, places where I think it's outright a bad one, and places where maybe I don't love it, but it's better than it could have been or whatever. So the devil's in the details, but we'll do a quick rundown. And I'm not sure if I shared with your listeners, when you go to do comment and review this plan, there's 2 versions on the website. One of them's really long and one of them's really short. Read whatever you have time for, because you should read as much as you can, but the short version will totally suffice if you need a quick rundown. Okay, where's our start? This is the whole history lesson on it. Okay, yes, the plan's divided briefly into primary focus areas, and then each of those has a couple sub-provisions within it, and those are kind of the meat and potatoes of what we need to talk about. So, I'll run down the big picture and then kind of a couple elements like you asked.
Okay.
I'm just trying to find the right chart.
You're fine. They did make it really pretty.
They did. They're very good at that.
Yeah, whoever did that did a fine job.
So the process has been supported by a planning consultancy that does this type of work for cities. As a private citizen who wants to be responsible with tax dollars, I at times am a little uneasy with how much we spend on consulting fees.
Right.
Oh,
and
yeah,
is there
yeah.
a way to stop that and say, if you want an idea, you come up with the idea, and because a consultant knows, again, they're not from here. They don't know everything. They just come in and leave, and here's what we think.
That's actually a big dynamic, independent of this discussion, that I think people should be cognizant of. I don't know that a goal of having no consultants ever is realistic. I think we had talked, city council members themselves are often volunteers with full-time jobs. That's all good and well, but most of these consultants are going to be from the Denver area or other urban areas. Even if they're not trying to be this way, they're going to have some biases that sneak into the plan. Frankly, as a committee, we found a lot of those biases and cut them back out, and that was great. The consultants ultimately, they don't live here. They're not like married to any of their own ideas, but we need to be careful about it.
Now they come in, get paid, and leave.
Exactly, yeah. So,
and they charge a bunch.
well, that's
For
where
what
I
they
get
do.
uneasy as a taxpayer. Is I will say, for at least this consultant, they do a great job, but they're expensive.
And do we need everything that they do? I mean,
Well, my thought as a conservative, and I won't criticize this plan too much in specific, is that if our legislation and our city policy is so big, frequent, and complicated that we can't get it done without hiring consultants, maybe that's a sign that we shouldn't pass so many laws. But that's just my soapbox.
no, that's my
That's
soapbox too.
We all have our soapboxes,
That's
so
right.
that's good.
So focus area 1 is built environment, and I'll give their definition. Targets community design that enables sustainable and efficient transportation, housing, goods, and services while protecting natural resources. And it goes on, but this is physical infrastructure.
And what does the word sustainable actually mean?
I think it depends who you ask. That's a subjective term.
What does it mean to them?
I'll give my definition and what I think their definition is, because
Okay.
this has become a really loaded word, right? To me, sustainable is always going to be a resources question. Are you using your resources no faster than you can make them last? Are you spending money faster than you earn it? Are you using water faster than the lake refills? That to me is sustainable, right? That said, I think a lot of proponents of environmental legislation have this view of sustainable as you're going to use as few resources as possible and lower your own quality of life to save the environment no matter what. That's maybe not the best faith take in the world.
No,
but
that's exactly what it says. Right? If you look up the definition of a sustainable, your definition is not it.
And it gets down to this conservation versus environmentalism feud that's big right now. I very much consider myself a conservationist. That's a lot of why I'm so engaged in this stuff.
You take a look at people like myself that were born and raised on ranches. You know how to conserve. You know how to use your resources correctly. And we didn't need anybody to tell us, that we couldn't graze this pasture down so low that it wasn't going to come back, and things like that. So in a way I kind of take offense to the fact that they think that I'm that uneducated, if you will.
And I'm going to just add one little caveat in. Where I go is, I remember when we were in college and beyond and having our first kids, we didn't have disposable diapers. We had cloth diapers that you washed and reused, and plastic pads. And the landfills are full of disposable diapers, which all the environmentalists who have children are using, instead of saying, oh no, I need to use cloth diapers because they're not convenient. I know in my political science department we had styrofoam cups, and I told them, you know what? Stop using those. They don't biodegrade, so we went to cups that are like this. You wash them and use them again. And we didn't have plastic bottles of water all the time. So, and we had paper bags because paper is a renewable resource. And I know Gordon Harbert told us, he says, I don't understand what the deal is, because paper is renewable. And we are constantly putting more trees in, which are good for the environment, and to use it. But then they switched to plastic bags. And then they said, well, you bad people, you're using plastic bags. But that's all we provide you with. I mean, it makes me angry.
No, I'm with you. I think here's the key difference, right? And why I would say I'm a conservationist and maybe not a radical. It comes down to choice and what are we doing voluntarily versus what are we being compelled to do. Right. So I look, and as a conservative, I go to the grocery store, go to Walmart, go wherever, and see just the sheer amount of plastic packaging that everything's in, and you can't buy it any other way.
Right.
I think the people nowadays who advocate that we don't do all that are people we would think of as kind of liberal. Well, if we don't want to be wasting resources for absolutely no reason, well, we should have a problem with that too. But to me, the difference is the fact that if I think plastic straws are bad for the environment, I just don't use plastic straws. I don't need the government to ban me from doing so. And in fact, I'll tell you, I'm going to punt on the paper versus plastic straw debate. I just haven't really ever used straws to drink, so it's a null question. But my approach is, look, if we want to conserve resources and use them sustainably, persuade your fellow citizens to conserve resources and use them sustainably. Don't mandate a bunch of stuff. I would rather live in a society that just values that stuff than one that does it begrudgingly. But I'll get off the soapbox and get back to basics.
Go back to this. I'm sorry.
No, I'm with you on that. Focus area 2 is climate resilience. This is one where I'll go to bat a little bit for some of the intent behind it, because I know it's going to raise a lot of skepticism and get people's ears up. I like this resilience term, or this adaptability term, and maybe not some of the other terms you hear around climate change. How do we as a community, when we're making our decisions and as citizens, what are we going to do to be secure against stuff that might happen? That's stuff that good communities have been doing since the beginning of always, right? We're going to be careful when we're building new subdivisions adjacent to areas susceptible to wildfire. When we meet people who think that if you cut down a tree, an angel loses its wings, and we subsidize their homeowners insurance because they're at a massive risk of wildfire and refuse to do mitigation work, we can look at terms like resilience and say, look, regardless of where you fall on the question of the causes or significance of climate change, our wildfires have been going up and badly so, and driving homeowners insurance rates up and all that. A lot of the people who claim to be really concerned about climate change on a personal level won't do fuels mitigation around their homes, and the rest of us are paying the price for it.
I think the word for that is common sense.
It wouldn't be a bad term, would it?
It would not. You got to think a little bit that all this tall grass is so beautiful and green has to die.
For a little tiny duration it is. So we want to be resilient to threats in our community. That might mean, hey, we're going to continue to add our water storage capacity on the Mesa for our municipal water supply. It might mean, all things considered, we'll incentivize people not to waste a ton of water. There's a lot of good stuff we can do in that space.
I think the wording is what is frightening.
Well, and it's again based on what is your philosophy of the cause and what needs to be done to mitigate it. Because I don't think anybody would say there's anything wrong with clearing out brush and stuff. But again, it's a government thing where they haven't incentivized it to say, well, like, and I said it last time, if you offer people money to just take a little tiny bit for firewood of those beetle-infested trees, and they want to cut it down, they want to use it, don't tax them on it, don't charge them, pay them a little bit of money to take it out, instead of having a great big company come in and say, okay, we're going to get this big government grant to send FCI in and take it all out.
And destroy all the little trees while we're at it. I mean, we're just going to mow it all down.
Yeah.
Or we're gonna cut none of it down because it's on Department of the Interior land, and if we don't do 20 years of environmental review before we do a thinning project, we're gonna get sued by Wild Earth Guardians.
Right.
That's what I saw in a lot of my time doing federal policy work. Oftentimes, the land management agencies, the forest, the BLM, whoever, that we often see as, these are the villains, they won't let us cut down any trees, they're driving fire. These are professional foresters. Usually they know that we should thin stuff out and would love nothing more to do that, but they will get sued by any number of groups anytime they do anything. It's really frustrating.
And is there, and I know it's totally off topic, is there anything to do about that and say, hey, stop?
My thought on that, ultimately, until we have Equal Access to Justice Act, EJA, and NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act reform, these are our big environmental laws set by Congress, we're not going to change that incentive structure. Ultimately, with the Equal Access to Justice Act, we've created this huge cottage industry of environmental nonprofits who we are paying to sue us.
No.
Not great.
No.
It gives radicals a lot of power. If you want to look at NEPA, that's National Environmental Permitting Act, the intent there was to do, when we're doing anything on federal lands, we need to be quantifying what all the impacts are. That was the original intent, and we probably should be quantifying those impacts. What it has turned into is you're going to be in court for 20 years and add billions of dollars to the cost of everything.
We just make lawyers rich.
It actually, if you want to look at a local issue, look at the discussion around building an interstate interchange at 29 Road, which we've been having for, from what I know, 20 or 30 years.
Yes.
Why is it that the original interstate highway system, think of how many exits there are between, I don't know, Glenwood Springs and the Utah border? There's a lot of exits already that all got built kind of at the same time, probably relatively quickly.
Exactly.
But it takes us 20 or 30 years to add one more in a place that really needs it if traffic's any indicator. Why is that? Well, the land to the immediate north and south of that either is federal or used to be because of a land exchange. Because you're doing a project there, it triggers certain environmental review laws. A huge chunk of the cost of that proposal is just the cost of paying for those and for how long it takes to do them.
So is that kind of like a little mafia deal? No, I'm just kidding.
He can't. No, don't get him in trouble.
It's insurance. You need to pay me.
Yeah,
sorry,
I'll withhold judgment there. I have some thoughts.
No.
But when we have plans like this that are identifying values in that arena, actually sometimes that can be ammo to help us be clear that we need to be ready for stuff that's coming or have contingency plans in place. I'm all about that, but I've said from the beginning, this plan is really kind of a platform for whatever future elected or citizens want it to be. We can look at something like climate resilience and people who have maybe our view of environmental stewardship. This could be a big opportunity, right? If you're someone who wants to block all development forever and make stuff really expensive and mandate what types of cars people drive, you could also cite that as justification. So careful what you wish for. Yeah. We'll go. I better finish my
Yes,
rundown.
sure. Yep.
Focus area 3 is energy stewardship.
Okay.
I think that one's pretty self-evident. This is one element of the plan, though, where I think a lot of the more controversial provisions or interpretations are going to come into play. Energy stewardship might be that we encourage a healthy mix of energy sources in our community. That would also be
Including
resilience.
nuclear? No.
No, including nuclear. Actually,
Okay.
when the plan came up, originally a lot of the draft discussion concerned wind and solar, and what we can do to incentivize or encourage that or whatever. Not just myself, but a pretty diverse cross-section of committee members said we need to leave room in there for nuclear and
Natural gas. And,
all of it.
Yeah.
Is it likely some nuclear thing gets built in the city in the near future? Probably not, but let's have the humility to say that if technological advances happen, and maybe it's none of those, maybe it's something we haven't heard of yet, we haven't boxed ourselves into we're going to do as much wind and solar as possible.
Good.
Yeah, absolutely. Focus area 4 is waste management. Again, a pretty self-evident plan, but one that could have some nuts and bolts impacts on us. And I'm going to go on a real brief tangent on
Okay,
this.
do it.
This is where I'll start to sound a little more environmentalist-ish. Everybody here who goes to the North Desert out by the airport anytime ever sees that there's a ton of trash that gets dumped out there. A lot of it's electronics and actual environmental hazards. Most of that, I think, is because there's people who are trashy and will do that instead of taking it to the landfill.
Because they don't want to pay for it.
It's the finances, though. So many people that have those kind of things that can't get rid of it, can't afford to take it to the dump and get rid of it. They can't afford the trash to take it. There's a catch-57 there.
Great
22.
point.
Catch 22.
Whatever the number.
Well, yeah, okay.
Actually, though, that's a great point, and that's where I was going with it, is that if you look at the cost to dispose of environmental contaminants like at our landfill, and that's basic stuff, tires, your refrigerator, the TV,
Right.
it's pretty expensive, and enough so that if a person is maybe just irresponsible enough to debate whether or not they should do it, that price is going to give them their excuse to go dump stuff in the desert where they shouldn't do it. This plan actually identifies what can we do to incentivize people not doing that and use the landfill instead. The landfill right now is obviously a county level thing, but they take a ton of city trash. The plan says that we're going to be working as a city in the future on identifying ways that we can divert that type of waste into more proper venues.
Right.
Well, that's a great idea.
Right.
We should be doing that.
I do have a comment, though, because the city recently did the 4 trash cans that you can have. And I'm questioning how good that is, because I see all the big trucks, and we have one truck that comes around for the regular truck. One truck how many trucks? Is that really saving energy? Is that saving time? Is that cost effective?
There's a great clip, and it was one of the guys from the Penn and Teller Magic thing. They had a show years ago, and they did a bit on recycling and having a bunch of trash cans. And I'll show you guys the link afterwards, but if you want to share it with your audience, actually it's hysterical and they're going to get my point. I'll punt on the rest of that question, but yeah, you should look at it. It makes your point well.
Okay.
Focus area 5 is water conservation. That's one where I think there's a lot of consensus in our community.
There is.
That doesn't mean that everything in this plan is automatically a good idea, or that any idea to conserve water is something we should do. A lot of people,
At any cost.
At any cost, that's the thing, is we need to be doing what's worth the benefit. But, a lot of people in our community just assume this narrative that, like a lot of the West and the desert, we have pretty limited water supplies and really need to start ratcheting down. I think there's a lot of places where that really is the case. Phoenix, Arizona. Grand Junction actually has very, very large municipal water rights reserves, as does Ute Water and some of the others. That's not to say that I
go willy-nilly.
throw a fountain in your yard every day.
The thing about it is that the city in the past has mandated that any business that goes in has to do a certain amount of landscaping, and
You have to water it.
You have to water it. I think that was really bad conservation ideas when they started it a long time ago. I think it's every bit as bad now. So are they going to quit doing that kind of thing? Is that going to be something?
Yeah, they do have some of that. They'll do a turf. They will.
They have a turf conversion program.
And is that really good? I mean, we need the trees, we need the grass, and it's as much for emotional people need green. They need to have the outdoor space. They
Real
don't.
stuff.
Yeah.
This brings up an interesting point, and it applies to this plan and every other one. I said this is a visionary plan. Most of the city's visionary plans have contradictions amongst one another. They have competing elements. So this plan, for example, very much incentivizes, hey, maybe you look at xeriscaping or doing turf conversion or quantifying the impact of certain amounts of open space or whatever. Stuff that it might be a little controversial, but we at least kind of understand the gist of it. Other city plans, that could be our transportation engineering design standards, open space dedication, parks, mandate certain amounts of landscaping that's done in certain ways. Those can be at odds with one another. Council, when they're doing their job well, will work to reconcile those, and I think in this case they probably already are or intend to. But
All things
once
in
again,
moderation. All things in moderation.
yeah, but no, I mean, I think what it really says here is we should be mindful of our water use in this community. Here's 3 or 4 things that we could do to have that. Just be careful that we don't get ourselves into that trap of we're going to deny building permits because of the low water year. This doesn't do anything like that, but it could be that way in the future.
Right.
But that's an area where I think we'll find a lot of consensus. Focus area, I don't remember my Roman numerals. That's a 5 or a 6?
That's 4.
4. Well, there you go. I really don't remember them. City leadership. This concerns stuff that the city itself does as it pertains to environmental policy or what have you. That means what are the city buildings going to do? How are we going to go about doing public feedback or direction or whatever? What standards do we hold ourselves to? I'm almost taking a pass on the merits of that because it's only going to apply to city-owned assets. I think if the city wants to mandate certain stuff for their buildings and doesn't want to tell private industry what to do, by all means set the example. They've identified a desire to have energy efficient and sustainable buildings. I as a developer, maybe that's more expensive than it's worth to me one way or another. I don't know. But I don't know that there's any harm in the city at least having the discussion. Where we as concerned citizens should be careful, though, is when it comes time to renovate City Hall or consider what type of fuel our fleet vehicles use or whatever. We need to be careful that we're not opting for way, way, way more expensive alternatives because of environmental justification. I would look, a big part of the city's fleet is actually fueled by that compressed natural gas from the Persico treatment plant. Well, that's actually a really good idea, right?
Right.
If we weren't careful, technically that is a carbon-based fuel.
Right.
If we're not careful, we could phase that out in favor of electric fleet vehicles and actually hurt ourselves. That specific item came up, and everyone was pretty gung-ho to make sure that we can keep using the methane for those.
Yeah.
The devil's in the details. Got to keep thinking that stuff through. That kind of covers the focus areas, and then there's a chart of implementation priorities that are a little bit more specific. Here's the 4 or 5 things that pertain to each area. I'd encourage your listeners, go through and look at those, because there's a few that I think we're going to find some support on, a handful that are going to throw some big red flags up, and then a few that are, what difference does this actually make?
Right.
And I have a few minutes. Let me look through and double check the ones I really wanted to bring up today. We may not have time to get into detail, but I'd just like to draw people's attention to them. And we could probably get away with going just a hair over if we need to.
Okay. Yay.
Yeah.
Love it. The bad influence. I'm always the one that'll help people be
That's
late.
right. No, I've got a fun
I'm the
meeting,
timekeeper.
but-
I'm really bad about that.
Okay, so within each of these, there's any number of provisions. I'm not going to hit all of them, but I'll go through those categories we just specified. So built environment, I'll bring up one that makes me a little uneasy, and that's focus area A. Focus on improving safety and connectivity through intersections for pedestrians and cyclists. Develop modern and safe intersection standards for retrofits and begin implementation. This is one that we've already seen an example of in our community that sounds really well intentioned and is maybe pretty controversial or something I wouldn't be on board with. there's a big trend in urban design right now to look at our communities and say, hey, we're really, really car-oriented infrastructure-wise, and if we want people to have that choice of options, we need to be doing other stuff. Where I get a little concerned is, one, mandating additional infrastructure increases housing costs and our cost of living. Maybe it's worth it, maybe it's not, but the people who advocate that typically say, at any price. Well, no, not at any price. Bike lanes in a community where you don't live because you can't afford it don't really help you.
Right.
Some amount of that infrastructure would probably improve our community, but we need to hold people to account on whether or not it's reasonable. And then a big part of that trend that I've seen, maybe not immediately in our community, although I could see it going that way, but definitely in other communities, they're really starting to interpret that as, hey, bikes and walking versus cars, like it's a UFC fight. And rather than making it easier for pedestrians to get around our community, they're just making it harder for cars, like they're competing or something. We see that in our community with 4th and 5th Street that are 2-lane right now. Those are being converted to 1 lane right now. It's, I think, going to be one big, relatively comfortable lane, and then a good amount of that footprint is being dedicated to bikes. But that's a decision that, by the way, is not related to this plan. I just bring it up.
That looks to me like an accident looking to happen.
A lot of people think so. I don't.
I'm just kind of picturing it now.
Yeah.
I'll reserve judgment till I think about it a little bit more.
Yeah, and I don't even know that I have an immediate opinion on that one, but I know a lot of people have already approached me with, hey, that's a bad idea, and here's why. Well, we'll see how it pans out, but be careful that we're not just going, well, people drive too much, let's make it harder to drive, and you'll ride a bike instead.
Right. Well, and as I said, it's not family friendly, and it's not, because you have time limits to do things.
We're setting ourselves up to have nothing but golf carts for us, for people downtown, you know?
And then I'll look at a positive one within built environment, and that's F. Determine appropriate incentives for developers to install desired features that exceed minimum code requirements. We talked a little bit. Building codes are primarily set at the state level and then enforced by city and county and what have you. Those change all the time. They've gotten hugely expensive. They're hard to keep track. This just grants the city the option where they'd want to come up with some sort of grant or incentive program if they wanted to give developers a break on their permit fee cost or tax incentives, to say, hey, if you want to build this really sustainable development or incorporate X, Y, or Z, we're going to have the resources in place to help you do that without the state legislature mandating it.
Okay.
Okay, so the one that I'll draw your attention to under climate resilience, and I already talked about it a little bit, is action P, conduct a study of the air quality impact of requiring tailpipe emissions controls. You'll note it just says conduct a study, so basically we're going to see if that would move the needle or not. We had a broader discussion of air quality, which resulted in the committee agreeing to include the language, maintain existing air quality standards. We should maintain our existing air quality standards.
Yeah. Right.
And like we talked about, when our air quality does dip from day to day here, it's typically something outside of our control. Wildfire, smoke, and inversion or whatever. I can tell you right now, doing vehicle emissions compliance like Denver does is not going to have a meaningful impact on our air quality. We should make it clear at this point, and I'll tell you, I do not think there's any intention to implement that. But maybe City Council 10 years from now, they're looking at the last 8 of us who still have gas-powered cars and trying to get us to sell them. They say, well, we're going to start doing emissions controls to make your life hard. Make it known that the will of the community when this plan went through was, we want to keep our air quality high. It is not, we want to penalize drivers.
Right.
And there's a difference there.
Okay, so that would be one we might want to comment on.
Absolutely, it would be, yeah. Waste management, just because we talked about it, there's a couple different ideas in how we might do that. But action item Z, improve education for residents on how to recycle and where to divert materials. Maybe not a bad idea. Maybe we're preaching to the choir when we do that. But I think
the choir knows where to.
Yeah, exactly. But everybody hates that all the stuff is getting dumped in the desert all the time. If you look, there's another subset of that, and I'm a little confused on the nomenclature. But there's a bunch of different incentive items on what we can do to make it easier for people to actually take that to the landfill instead of dumping it.
That's what I was going to say. Is there a way that we could take the people who cannot afford those kind of things and actually help them out by taking this stuff?
Or how about we just make it cheaper for everybody? I mean, why does it always have to be the people that can't afford it? The whole middle class gets hit by this, and it's always, well, let's help these poor people, and then the wealthy don't need it. And so the whole middle class just make it that, we don't want you doing this, so bring it here, and we'll do it as part of our government, which was there to benefit the general public. And just say, it's free.
Yeah, well, and that's a good point. There's no shortage of things that a local government might do to make it cheaper to take your hazardous materials to the landfill, to offer grants, to subsidize, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of stuff that they might be eligible for in the future to do that. This plan ought to be interpreted as that would be a good goal, and if anyone has an idea that would help, then we should really take that seriously. I've looked into this a little bit because people dumping stuff in the desert's like a big pet peeve of mine.
Yeah.
I look, don't get me wrong, I like to go out there with guns and tannerite and blow up old appliances in the desert too, but I pick up the pieces when I'm done, and a lot of people do not.
Right.
I've looked into why it's so expensive, though, to take that stuff to the landfill. The county waste department, it's not like they're making money on electronics recycling.
Right.
They're just charging what it costs, and the cost is expensive.
Put a bigger portion of the budget for that.
We could budget to subsidize that. We could seek federal support for that. We could look at the environmental laws that make it cost that much to recycle that stuff in the first place. But what I know is that a lot of people are looking at a choice between, hey, I've got this giant old TV with a bunch of junk in it. Right now I have a choice between dispose of it responsibly at the landfill and it's $100 versus dispose of it in the desert and it's free. Those are kind of your two options right now, and those of us who maybe aren't jerks are going to pay the price and hold our nose while we do it. But if we were to make that a little bit cheaper, you're not, no matter what you do, it's not going to be worse than everyone just dumping in the desert.
Right.
Well, I think the average person would think the way you do. Yes, I'll get rid of the stuff. If I can afford to do it, I'd be glad to get rid of it. But if I can't afford it, what do I do?
Yeah.
Leave it out in front of your house and say
Yeah,
free.
that's no.
No, I'm being a
Go
smart
there.
out.
No.
Okay,
Yep.
go ahead.
And then I'll look at the water conservation element. I'm going to speak a little bit more broadly on this one because it has like 10 different provisions here. Again, I'll just say don't take the bait of getting really gung-ho about future city decisions as it concerns new development. We have a housing inventory shortage. We need more housing in this community. Those houses are going to use water at some point.
Yes.
We can look at other communities in the West where they're actually denying building permits and making their housing inventory shortage worse by not building anything, citing the lack of water or the need to conserve water as justification for that. Probably most people in our community agree we really do need to be careful with how we use our water. Do not, however, be so aggressive about not utilizing water that you create a community where your kids can't afford to live when they grow up.
Right.
The truth, if you look at both the city and then our municipal water suppliers, so the city itself, some of the others, they've done a fantastic job building up big water capacity, especially you, over the years. We need to do our part. By all means, this plan would, for example, allow developers or private citizens incentives to do turf conversion for their yards, airscaping, whatever. Probably a lot of people would like to take them up on that. But let's be careful that we don't mandate a bunch of stuff that's more harm than good on that
The
front.
word is mandate.
Right.
It is.
Right.
It is, yeah. And I think we are also water conscious, that if we're not careful, we'll sign off on restrictive policies before we realize that they don't do what they say they do. I think I'll leave it at that for today.
Okay.
I'm happy to answer any questions or share resources, but I think that's a good start. And I guess I'll sum up my position on this whole plan for your listeners. It's going to look relatively benign in the short term and when it's passed. It's clear, however, that there's some philosophical intent to implement a lot of symbolic trends in our city's policies. that maybe are going to make our community more expensive or make the things that we have to comply with when we build housing more difficult or whatever. As you look at this plan, now's the time.
Or just take away our freedoms.
Or take away our autonomy, honestly. As you look at this plan right now, know that the impacts that actually affect people's lives are probably years in the future, but this plan is going to be cited to justify or oppose or whatever. Get your comments on the record now that basically this is how I would like the plan to be interpreted. This is how I see the plan's goals for our community. Tell them what you do want on this subject area, and then when City Council 5, 10, 15 years from now is debating something and they say, well, according to the sustainability plan, we're supposed to do X, those records will be on the public record, and you can say, well, no, actually, here's all the stuff the city said when we passed this. It's pretty clear what the goal was, and you should know that. Yeah.
So do your letter writing, do your complaining, be
That's
involved.
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Go to the public reading and make your voice be heard.
Just be involved.
Yes.
Hogan,
thank you so much. We're going to have you back again.
Absolutely.
And we do have some questions on the transitional housing, but I don't know that you have time to make any quick comment on that, or
I'll make one quick one because we could talk for a long time about this.
We could.
So interim housing is a policy the city's been advancing to create or permit or allow some form of managed semi-permanent campsites for homeless people. I think the idea is that as they transition from unmanaged homelessness to something more permanent, there's a gap in the ladder of steps to get from A to B. I think that's probably true, but this plan, the way it's proposed right now, would allow facilities like that to be permitted in virtually any zoned area within our community. There's a lot of little details about what they would have to do to comply with that. My organization feels that that's really too broad, that it's going to bring a lot of negative impacts into the areas where they could hypothetically be placed. And I think a lot of the community is going to agree with us that if we let this be a blank check, we're going to end up in a situation like Denver or whatever, where we're totally getting impacted and taken advantage of. I think we need to be careful not to be a torch and pitchfork mob that says, hey, don't ever allow anything ever. But this is, right now, it's not a great idea. Council needs to know that there need to be some guardrails on where we put this stuff. Right now, again, is the time to submit your comments to council, and I'll tell you there's two good ways to do that. One, on the Engage GJ website. They've had some comments, and there's a good plan summary there. But two, there's an email address where you can send your thoughts on this, and it just goes directly to every member of City Council. And I believe that address is just council or citycouncil@gjcity.org. I can find it and have you share it with your listeners.
okay.
Council and staff got an earful on this to date. I think it has proven to be a lot more controversial than they originally anticipated. They're going to pass whatever they pass depending on who they've heard from and what pressures they face. A lot of the time they're going to pass stuff that would be really unpopular if people knew what it was, so you need to do your work and make sure you know what it is.
And isn't there a public hearing on this coming up, like the next city council meeting, open comment?
Let me double check that. So far this has gone to the council workshop a couple times where it's been controversial and staff has been directed to do more public comment or make tweaks or whatever. At this point, I think they're nearing the phase where it is going to go back to council for different readings and hearings. I'll share those dates with you. I don't remember them off the top of my head.
All right.
But people should know, and whenever it happens, it's going to happen relatively soon.
Okay.
Thank you, Hogan, very much
Yes.
for joining us.
Yes.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And you've been listening to Mesa County Compass. This is the truth as we see it, the facts as we know them. You decide.